Hi, in this session we are going to talk about links and forms. So when I say link, so here what is happening is that we are just working on a single page, but that is not going to happen, right? Your website will have lots of pages, okay? So what I want is that we will have certain links, and if you click on that link, what will happen is that we will go to some other page. Now the transition can happen from one page to another page in my website, or the navigation can happen from my page to some other URL on the internet. Okay, both of that is absolutely fine. So what we do is that we write a text and we add a link to that particular text, and on click of that particular text we will go ahead and we will go to some other page. Okay, so for that I'll just refresh this. There's some old code over here. Yeah, so for that what I'll do is that I'll use a tag. So I'll have a, as soon as I hit enter we will have a tag. Here we have href. So href means here we have to give the link to the URL where I want the website to go on link of this particular content, whatever content I put in here. So right now let's say I just want to go to some other page on my website only. Let's say I want to go to contact.html. Okay, so what we are going to do here is, what is the plan basically, that we will have a link over here. Let's say you are making a website and let's say someone just comes, reads the website or reads whatever content is there, but what you want is that you want to capture some information like who is reading, or maybe you can just tell them that okay, if you share the information, maybe I'll mail you some content, some really great content, and you as a user, let's say you really like the content that is out here and you want more of that. So for that you will add the contact details. So it's a win-win situation for both. So in that case what I'll do is that I'll create an HTML page in which we will have a form, but how to go to that particular HTML page, how to go to that particular form. So for that we are creating a link over here. So let's say I write please share your contact. Okay, so in this case what will happen is that as soon as I click on please share your contact, we go to contact.html, but since we have not made contact.html, we first need to create that file. So I'll do contact.html. okay, now let's go ahead and reload this. If you see, as soon as I click on this, I go to contact.html, but since we don't have anything on contact.html, it will be a blank page. We will add the form over there. Now here we can add simply contact.html or any other HTML page in my website only, or I can add some external URL. Let's say what if I want that, on hit of this I go to google.com. So I'll write https w.google.com, or you can simply go to google.com and you can copy paste the URL. Okay, so let's say I do this. Now if I click on this, I will be redirected to google.com. So links are that simple. Okay, now let's say I go back to contact.html and I want to create a form. So basically if you have to take any information from the user, you generally create forms. So forms have pretty much the meaning that it has in real life. You will be having a form in which there will be fields. You have to put in the input in those fields, and you have to just submit that. That's what we are going to do. So let's do that. So let's go to contact.html. So here we have contact.html. So we will start making our form over here. Now let's go ahead and create a contact form. So let's say in the contact form we will have name, email ID, and maybe year of study, which year the student is studying in, and we'll have a submit button. So in order to create a form, the first thing we use is the form tag. Okay, we'll talk about action as we go ahead, and inside this we put all the fields. So the fields will majorly have two things. One is label. Okay, so label does the task of just informing the user that what input we are taking. So let's say here we write it name, and then we have input. Okay, so this is the place where the user can add the input or put the input. So let's say if I run this, so if you see what is here, this name is the label, and this particular field is the input field where user can put in their name. Now let's say what if we remove the label. Okay, so if we remove the label, and let's say there are so many boxes like this, user won't understand that in which box which particular input I have to give. So that is why it is necessary to have label. though we have another alternative to using label, which are called placeholders. So in that case, what we will do is that we'll add a placeholder here. Okay, so how placeholder behaves is that inside this input field only, you will see a very light text which is name, and as soon as you start writing, this gets invisible. Okay, so again, let's say even if we don't have the label, we just have this particular input text or input field, user will understand from this placeholder that okay, this is where I have to put the name. So this input is blank only, it's just that you can see a text here which gives you an information what sort of input you have to give. So now let's say similarly we add for email. So let's see how email varies from the text field. So in the label we'll add email, and let's say in the input, rather than putting type as text, we will put email. Okay, and I'll tell you the benefit of using email, okay, and why not text. And here also we can write placeholder. So you want to use placeholder, or you want to use label, or you want to use both, depends upon the UI UX or you get from the designer, or for that matter majorly depends upon the use case. So, okay, so let's go ahead and run this. So now you will have an email here. Here you have the placeholder. Now the benefit of using email is that if I use type email, there will be a basic validation that will be added by the browser. So if you try and write an invalid email, let's say you try and add an email in which there is no @sign. So the browser will understand that this is not valid email and you'll get the message. We will see that as we go ahead. Also, if you can see, what is happening is that all of them are coming in the same line. So I'll add a BR here. Okay, and I'll add one more BR. Okay, now let's run this. So now we have name and we have email, and what else we wanted? We wanted a drop down to ask that user is in which particular year. So for that again we'll add the BR. Let's add 2 BR one by one. Okay, my bad. Okay, next we'll add a drop down. So for the drop down, let's say I'll again add the label. Okay, in the label, let's say I put year of study. Okay, and here what I'll do is that I'll add the drop down. So for drop down we will have the select tag. Okay, inside this select tag we'll have all the options. Okay, so the first option, let's say I have is first year or first. Okay, the second option, let's say I have is second, and then we have third, and then we have fourth. Okay, let's edit this. Okay, now let's go ahead and run this. So now here you will see year of study, and there's a drop down, and you will be able to see the elements that is there in the drop down. And by default what will happen is that whichever element you select, it will be there in this particular drop down. So here if you see, there is an option value. Okay, we'll add this as we go ahead. First let's just add the submit button. So let's say I've added all the fields and I want to submit it, and based on submission we can do different tasks. We will talk about that. First let's add the submit button. So for adding the submit button, I simply have to do input type equal to submit. Okay, let's add. Okay, let's hit enter. So now as soon as you submit, so if you see what is here, what happens on submission. So as soon as you submit, my agenda is that the data should be passed. Now where the data should be passed. So in that case, you can put any URL over here. So whichever URL you pass on over here, the data will be passed to that URL. So let's say if I write index.html, okay. So in this case, what will happen is that as soon as I click on submit, what will happen is that this particular data, whatever data is here, will be passed to index.html, okay. Another thing that we have over here is that the email verification that I talked about. So now let's say if I do ABC and I click on submit. So if you see you are getting a message, please include an @ in the email address. So a basic validation have got added. Okay, now what happens is that in this particular case, if you see, you will have the URL has changed and there is a question mark after the URL. So why is there a question mark after the URL? So there is one more field we need to add here, which is method. So method can either be get or post. So for the get method, what happens is that whatever data I pass from this particular URL, so what will happen is that whatever data I pass from this particular URL, it will just go ahead in the URL itself. It will be embedded in the URL, okay. And the other thing is that if I have the post method, then it will go as a body, okay. Let's first try the get method. By default it is get only, and let's say I add get, okay. So in this case, if you want that whatever field you are adding, it should come in the URL, you should give it a name. So in this case, let's say I give it a name equal to name itself, okay. Here let's say I give name equal to email, okay. Here let's say we have year of study, okay. Here let's say we have name equal to study, okay. And now let's refresh and let's enter the elements. So it will be, let's say you have several options coming in. Let's say I write any email, okay, and when I submit. So if you see what happened is that in this case, okay, in this case what happened, let me make it big. In this case, this index.html was something which we had, okay, we had action index.html, and now what happened was that we had to pass all the data to index.html. So as soon as I click on submit, index.html is you can say that index.html gets executed, or this particular URL gets hit, and in this URL you have all the data that you have added in the form. So if you see, we have added name as Mamta Krishna 255, so that's some old name, don't worry about it, don't get into the complication of this name. Then we have the email that we have written over here, and then we have the study. So if you see, the study is empty over here. So why is study empty? We'll talk about that. So first let's make this post. So if you will see post, so as soon as I put this as post, let's go back to contact.html, okay. In this case, let's refresh, let's add the name, okay, let's add the email, let's submit. So now if you see, in this particular case, there is nothing there in the URL. So that does not mean the data is not passed. So in case of post, the data will be passed in the body. So we can't see that in the URL itself, but it will be passed in the body. Now what happens is that the major difference between get and post is this only. In case of get, whatever data we want to pass gets embedded or gets added in the URL itself, whereas in the case of post, it does not get URL, it gets there in the URL, it is there in the body. In case of get, the body is empty. Now the other use case which we had was that though we have year of study as first year, but it was not coming there, it was coming as blank. Why? Because this is just an option to show to the user. So whatever is the value there over here in this value attribute, that is something that will be passed, or that is something that will be taken out from the form. So for that, let's say I add 1 here, I add 2 here, I add 3 here, and I add 4 here, okay. So now let's say if I add get over here, okay, let's hit refresh, okay. submit. Now if I come here, you will see you get study equal to 2. So you have to ensure that you are putting the values here, and based on whatever value you have given, you can just go ahead and pass that, and actually it makes sense. Else what will happen is that you will get confused between that, okay, let's say there might be some very coding name which is suitable for coding but is not suitable for user to use, okay, or is not very user friendly. So in this case you can have that coding terminology over here, and you can use a user friendly name over here. Okay, so there is another thing, ID. Okay, so now this ID and for are very pretty much connected. So what happens over here is that right now this label is coming after select, but that is just the UI. Okay, that is just the UI. It's just that we have written the code in such a way, and the styling is such that this label is coming after UI, or after, sorry, just before this input element. In this case also label is coming before this input element, but if you see there is no particular relationship between this label and input. We have not connected them. So this is done using for and ID. Okay, so let's say I add for equal to name here, then ID will be name over here. So now what is this ID? So basically you can give an ID to your elements, and this particular ID uniquely identifies that particular element over here. So in this case it will uniquely identify this particular input box. So let's see if I put the ID as name, and since this is uniquely identifying a particular element or particular item in my web page, I want that there should be just one a particular ID should be unique throughout the page. It should not be the case that two elements are having the same ID, because as I said that it is identifying it it is identifying it uniquely. So ID has even broader use case. As we go ahead, we will see that we use ID for styling, and also in case of JavaScript. Okay, so there's a lot of use of ID. For now, just think of ID as a unique identification of this particular input field, and this for equal to name means that this particular label is for this particular ID. So here you might not see pretty much lot of difference, okay, or pretty much use case of this for an ID visually. But now let's say I add a checkbox. Okay, let's say I go ahead and add a checkbox over here. So for that, let's say I'll add the label, let's say for check, and let's say I keep the check as graduate. Okay, graduate, and then I put the input type equal to check, or let's keep it radio. Look, it will look more interesting. Okay, for radio button. Okay, and here let's say I put the ID as radio button. Okay, now let's run this. Okay, so if you see, this is the label here and this is the button. So if this is the checkbox. Let me add the BR as well to keep it away from the submit. Okay, so now what happens over here is that if I click on this, this also gets clicked. If I click on this, then this is definitely click. Okay, so what is happening is that if you click on this particular text or this particular label, this is also getting affected. Now let's say I remove this ID, or for that matter, even if I remove this for, or I keep the for as empty. Okay, so in this case, if you click on this, what will happen? It will get clicked. But if you click on this, there is no effect that is happening. So generally you use radio button if you have multiple options. You don't use radio button for one single option. Okay, so in this case, let's say I keep clicking on this, there is no effect that is happening over here. So let's say this will again be majorly used if you have 4 options and you want to choose any one of that. In that case, you can use radio. So if you have label, and if you have for and you have ID, then by clicking on the text itself, that particular radio button will get selected. Okay, so let's keep it radio button. Okay, so now if you see, what is happening here is that this is how a form works. And actually, there are many fields, there are many kind of input that we can add. One of the very interesting and very commonly used is password. So here we are just taking the user input. Now let's say, what if I'm asking the user to create or an account or to register for the website. So in that case, I might have name, email, year of study, graduate, and I might have a password field also. So now in that case, what I'll do is that, let me make it password. So I'll have the password field. So in the password field, again we'll have the label same as we have had till now, and we'll call it password. Okay, and for the input, we will put input type equal to password. Okay, now let's say I refresh. So you have a password over here. Okay, so if you see what happens if the text is password, is that it will come in a star form, or there is a dots that's coming. Though whatsoever you are typing, you must have seen this. Whenever you type a password, it just does not come up front, because obviously if there's someone that is sitting, who is sitting in front of you, he will be able to, or she will be able to see the password. So in this case, what will happen is that whatever you are writing, that will be written, but the password will not be visible just like that. Okay, so these are some of the fields. We will go ahead and we will discuss more and more fields in the upcoming sessions, or when we are creating forms. Okay, so make sure you practice these forms, and just go ahead and look around and like what are the other elements, and try on your own as well. Okay.